Ever felt the weight of unspoken expectations? Not the kind people announce, the quieter kind. The kind that lives in a glance held half a second too long. In a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. In a room that gets a little smaller every time you walk into it. I did. For years, I did. There are people who will never say you can't do it to your face. They're too polite for that. Instead, they say things like, I just worry about you and I hope it works out. Sentences that sound like support but land like doubt. They ask how things are going in a tone that already assumes the answer isn't great. They pivot the conversation when you talk about your plans, as if your dreams are an embarrassing phase they've quietly agreed not to make worse by engaging with. Family dinners were the worst. Sunday roasts with the good china out. My brother Mark holding court at one end of the table, my father leaning in to catch every word. And me. Sitting slightly sideways in my chair, half in and half out of every conversation, like I hadn't quite figured out how to belong in the room the way everyone else had. My achievements weren't dismissed with cruelty. They were dismissed with something far more deflating, mild, patient confusion. As if my choices were written in a language they were trying hard to be polite about not understanding. For years, I carried their doubt like a shadow. Always behind me. Always the same length as me. Impossible to outrun because it moved when I moved. Until one moment. One unexpected win. Turned every skeptical whisper into stunned silence. How did I go from being the family's quiet disappointment to the name they could no longer ignore? This is how it happened. I was 32 when the final comment got under my skin deep enough to stay. Tall. Lean. Usually in jeans and a faded hoodie. Dark circles from long nights hunched over a laptop, a cold coffee beside the keyboard I always meant to reheat and never did. I wasn't loud. I wasn't flashy. I just worked. But in my family, effort without visible, tangible success was essentially invisible. You could work 18 hours a day building something extraordinary. But if you couldn't point to a business card with a recognizable title, if you drove the same car for 6 years, you were still, as far as anyone could tell, figuring things out. My older brother Mark was the golden child. Not because he was unkind, he wasn't. He was just legible. Corporate job. Clear hierarchy. Quarterly reviews. New car. When he got engaged, the ring shone under restaurant lights like punctuation on a sentence everyone had been expecting. Me? Freelance software developer. Between stable contracts, as my family described it, their polished way of saying they didn't fully understand what I did and had quietly decided it probably wasn't going well. At Sunday dinners, my dad would ask Mark about promotions and projects with warm, leaning forward energy. Then he'd glance at me, always that glance, and say with a completely genuine, somehow devastating smile, "Still working on that little computer thing?" Little. I always smiled. Always nodded. Always deflected smoothly enough that the moment passed without either of us having to acknowledge what was underneath it. But every time someone asked when I'd get a real job, something tightened in my jaw. A small, hard thing I'd learned to carry quietly. They thought I was drifting. They had no idea I was building something that would eventually change everything. The breaking point came at my brother's engagement party. Rooftop venue. City lights below. Fairy lights strung between copper frames. Everyone dressed sharp. I stood near the railing with a glass of wine I wasn't really drinking, half listening to the conversation behind me. "I just hope he figures things out soon," my aunt said. Her voice was warm, genuinely concerned. That was the thing about this family. The doubt always came wrapped in care. It made it very hard to be angry about. "I worry about him," my dad replied. "He has real potential. He just lacks direction." Direction. The word dropped through me like a stone through still water. Not because it was cruel, because it was sincere. He genuinely believed it. And a part of me, the tired part that had been working in near isolation for 2 years, wondered for one hollow second if he was right. Later, Mark raised a toast. He was good at toasts, warm, funny, just self-deprecating enough to be charming. Near the end, he looked around the room with the comfortable confidence of a man completely at home in his own life, and said, "To success. And to making responsible life choices." People laughed. He smiled. And his eyes, just for a split second, flicked toward me across the room. Not cruel. Not triumphant. Dismissive. The way you glance at a piece of furniture you've stopped really seeing. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else that night. On the drive home, I didn't turn on music. I replayed that look over and over while the city lights streaked past the windows. Not the words. The look. They thought I was behind. They had no idea how far ahead I really was. For 2 years, I had been quietly building something I called Sentinel. No website. No press release. No LinkedIn post with a carefully staged desk photo. Just code, documentation, long nights, and a growing conviction that I was onto something real. The idea came from the work itself. Through years of freelance contracts, small businesses, mid-sized firms, startups scrambling to look more established than they were, I developed a habit of looking at the infrastructure underneath the surface. What I found, over and over, was the same thing: companies that considered themselves professionally run, even sophisticated, operating with security that was somewhere between optimistic and genuinely alarming. Outdated firewalls. Password policies that existed on paper and nowhere else. Executives who had been told their systems were secure and had accepted this the way you accept a weather forecast, with mild interest and no intention to verify it. The problem wasn't recklessness. It was invisibility. They had no way to experience what an attack would look like before an actual attack arrived. So I built a system that changed that. Sentinel was a controlled vulnerability simulation platform. It showed companies exactly where they were exposed, in real time, in a safe environment, before something real happened. It didn't just scan and report. It demonstrated. It made the invisible visible. I pitched it once, early on. 3 people in venture capital who had clearly made up their minds within 90 seconds. Too niche, one said. Too ambitious, said another. I drove home, sat in the car outside my flat, then went back inside, made coffee, and kept building. Because the work was real. The problem was real. Whether or not anyone else could see that yet wasn't something I controlled. The only thing I controlled was the quality of what I was making. So that's what I focused on. Months later, Mark invited me to tour his company's new office before its formal opening. Glass walls. Standing desks. Digital dashboards showing live metrics in blues and greens. He walked us through it with real pride. "This," he said, gesturing broadly, "is what stability looks like." I looked at the dashboards. The server room visible through a glass partition. The firewall configuration on one of the screens. The conventional, almost textbook network architecture that was fine for most purposes but carried the same quiet gaps I'd seen in a dozen companies before. After the tour, Mark pulled me aside. His voice was gentle in the way it always was when he decided something was for my benefit. "I could probably get you something here," he said. "Entry level, nothing glamorous, but stable. You're smart. You just need structure." Structure. I looked at him. He meant it kindly. There was no version of my brother that was malicious. But something shifted inside me in that moment, not rage, not jealousy. Something cleaner. The final piece of a decision clicking quietly into place. I didn't want their approval anymore. I'd spent years, without fully realizing it, building toward a moment of recognition, someone finally looking at me and understanding. But standing in that glass-walled office, listening to my brother offer me entry-level work out of compassion, I let that hope go. I didn't need them to understand. I needed the truth to speak for itself. And it was almost ready to. 2 weeks later, Mark's company hosted a live product launch. Investors present. Media watching. The kind of event where everything has been rehearsed and the pressure is a physical thing in the room. I watched the stream from my flat. Mark appeared on stage, confident, polished, exactly as he always was. "Our infrastructure is secure," he said. "We've built something you can trust." And then the screens flickered. Error codes appeared. Specific, technical, the kind that tell you immediately, if you know how to read them, exactly what category of problem you're dealing with. The live demo froze mid-sentence, in front of investors and journalists and everyone watching. Someone else had found the vulnerability first. I want to be clear about that. I had nothing to do with what happened on that stage. I had never tested their systems without permission, never attempted to access anything I wasn't invited to. What happened was the consequence of a gap I had seen privately and said nothing about, because I had no official standing to say anything. But I understood exactly what had happened. I had seen it coming the moment I stood in that server room. That night, I sent one email to 3 members of their board. Subject: you don't have a security problem. You have a visibility problem. Short. Clear. No performance. Here is what happened, here is why, here is what I'd built that addresses exactly this, and here is a live demo you can run right now. I attached a Sentinel demo environment, pre-configured, safe, fully documented. And went to bed. 2 days later, my phone rang at 8:47 in the morning. Not Mark. The CEO. Her name was Catherine. She had the manner of someone who has filtered a great many pitches and urgent requests, and has become very precise about what's worth her time. She wasn't calling to be polite. "We reviewed your system last night," she said. "The board reviewed it this morning. Every weakness you demonstrated was accurate. More than accurate, it was precise. You didn't just find the gaps. You documented exactly how to close them." A pause. "We'd like to talk about something more significant than a consultancy arrangement." We met the next morning. 3 hours. The kind of conversation where both parties already know what they want and the meeting is really just about confirming trust. They didn't want an entry-level hire. They didn't want a contractor. They wanted leadership. Someone who could implement Sentinel across their infrastructure and build a genuine security culture from the inside. Within a month, Sentinel was integrated. 6 weeks after that, I was head of security strategy. Not because I'd asked for it. Because I'd been ready for it. Because when the moment arrived, there was nothing between the problem and the solution except the question of whether I was willing to step forward. I was. The next family dinner felt different before it even started. A stillness in the house I didn't recognize at first. Everything proceeded as it always did: food, wine, familiar rhythms, except nobody said anything for a very long time. Then my dad cleared his throat. He looked at his plate for a moment. Then he looked at me, actually looked at me, not through me or past me. "We saw the announcement," he said carefully. "The new role. Impressive work. Impressive. No jokes. No little computer thing. Just impressive work," said in the voice of a man who meant it and was perhaps a little surprised to mean it. Mark looked at me differently too. Not above me. Not ahead of me. Just equal, 2 people at the same level, with different paths that had both, it turned out, been going somewhere. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, no one interrupted when I spoke. I told them a little about the project, what the problem was, what I'd built, how it worked. They listened. Actually listened. Asked questions from curiosity rather than politeness. The silence between us wasn't judgment anymore. It was recognition. Long overdue. All the more real for it. Here is the plain truth. I didn't win because my brother failed. The launch incident wasn't my doing and wasn't my victory, it was a genuine crisis for real people, and I don't celebrate it. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't engineer a dramatic moment and swoop in as savior. That's the version people tell when they want revenge to look like justice. It's almost always fiction. What I did was simpler. I identified a real problem. I built a real solution. I worked in the dark for 2 years without external validation, without encouragement, without certainty. And when the moment arrived, not manufactured, just arrived, the way moments do, I was ready. Because here is what no one says about revenge: most real revenge isn't loud. It isn't a confrontation with the perfect speech. It's growth they don't notice until it's already happened. It's outgrowing the room that underestimated you so completely that one day you walk back in and it fits differently. Smaller. Not because the room changed, because you did. Sometimes revenge looks like not needing it anymore. Months later, Mark called me on a Tuesday evening. No occasion. "I've been thinking about the office tour," he said. "About what I offered you." "I remember," I said. "I was wrong." He didn't rush it. "I thought I was helping. I couldn't see what you were actually doing, and I think I confused not understanding it with it not being real." A long pause. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought about the engagement party. The rooftop. The fairy lights." His eyes finding me across the room for that fraction of a second. Every Sunday dinner. Every little computer thing. Every tightening in my jaw. And I found, to my own quiet surprise, that I wasn't angry anymore. "You couldn't see it because I hadn't shown it to you yet," I said. "That's not entirely your fault." I wasn't lost, I told him. I was building. He laughed, a small, genuine, relieved laugh. And something that had been taught between us for years finally eased. Not fixed overnight. Not magically uncomplicated. But moving in a different direction than it had been. The people who doubted you are not your enemies. They are people who couldn't yet see what you were building. Keep building anyway. The people who doubted you are not your enemies. They are people who couldn't yet see what you were building. Keep building anyway.